trauma is any experience that happens in our world that we cannot consciously process in the moment. Fawn is translated as people-pleasing response. The brain has learned to best protect itself when it feels unsafe, make sure everyone in the situation is happy.
Complex trauma is a repeated exposure to distressing events, something that has happened multiple times, or it's made you feel a certain way, whether it's neglect, violence. When a young person knows the routine, they know the space, they know what to expect, they're less likely to be triggered.
50 to 66% of young people will experience a traumatic event by age 16. If I'm supporting a young person and the escalation wave is beginning, what I do can either escalate or de-escalate.
Podclass acknowledges the traditional and true custodians of the land we meet on here today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We're grateful to be here.
So no one told you teaching was gonna be this way. Your lesson plans are jokes, your patience broke, you're feeling in disarray. It's like you're always stuck in report writing, when it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, or even your school year. But I'll be here for you
When the students start to riot,
I'll be here for you.
even if your coffee's gone cold,
I'll be here for you, 'cause you're there for them too.
Hello, and welcome back to Podclass. You are with our friends here. My name is Will,
My name is Amanda.
And I'm Skye.
and it's just us today. What a change for a little hot second.
It is just so lovely, and we are here to talk about quite a big topic actually today.
It is a big topic, and probably we should preface before we go any deeper that we are going to be talking about all things trauma and trauma-informed practice today. And if this topic feels a little bit heavy for you, feel free to come back and visit the pod at a time that feels good.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like when we mention trauma-informed practice, undeniably, it has become a bit of a buzzword across the landscape in education for sure, and also in plenty of practices. And what we're going to dive into today is a little more, as Skye touched on, about what is trauma and why is trauma-informed practice essential, and what actually happens in our bodies when they become activated. But I think let's preface the entire conversation by saying that trauma-informed practice at its core is an approach that makes young people feel seen and heard and does not make them wrong while meeting them where they're at. And it's actually just best practice for all young people. I feel like it's a great place to start by saying these are not tools and practices we reserve for a young person that we know has experienced trauma.
Probably also just for anyone, right?
Of course.
Like, not just young people, but your staff.
100%. And as we move through this, it's like, depending on the types of trauma and depending on the level of activation experienced at different times, we've all been there in having our system activated. So I feel like what we should kind of start with is, unpacking the fact that it has become a bit of a buzzword across the landscape. We are referencing it a lot, and it is being referenced a lot, I believe, because we're in an age of wanting to do our best and be our best when it comes to helping young people and serving young people.
So starting with probably what do we actually mean when we talk about trauma-informed and the fact that it's not just, yes, it's a buzzword, but it's not a buzzword. It's actually really important for everyone who's supporting young people and for ourselves and our own systems to understand what it means. So when we talk about trauma, what we're talking about is anything where it's too much, too fast, too soon, or for too long. And trauma itself isn't the event, but what we're talking about is how the body actually responds to it.
Yeah. And it's actually any experience where, exactly like you touched, like too fast, too much, but it's any experience that happens in our world that we cannot consciously process in the moment, our body takes over. And that is where trauma is experienced in those moments. It is held, and trauma-informed practice is the best approach in responding to that.
And in the moment, right, it normally shows up as that classic, the fight, freeze, or fawn kind of responses in our bodies, because that's when our system kind of goes into autopilot to try and protect us. Is that right?
Yes. When something is occurring, and just like you said, it is too much, too fast, too quick, It is your friend, the amygdala wheel.
My pal, the fan.
We love our almond-sized friend in our brain. That is our primal survival driving part of our brain. What happens is that activates in a really, really strong way. So our prefrontal cortex, which is our really logical part of our brain, shuts down, and quite literally it is a rush. It is momentary. We've all experienced the amygdala hijack. And depending on the ways that we have learned, typically the ways we have learned to protect ourselves in those moments, we will lean into one of 4 survival responses. They are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. I feel like fawn, we can picture the other 3, and I'm sure we've all heard of them. I feel like fawn is lesser known, so it could be touching on what fawn is. And when I learned a little more about fawn, I was like, oh my gosh, this is me. So a fawn response, fight, flight, flight, and freeze are all fairly self-explanatory. Fawn is translated as kind of like a people-pleasing response. The brain has learned to best protect itself when it feels unsafe. Make sure everyone in the situation is happy. And if everyone else in the situation is happy and is cared for, that is the best way to protect yourself. So that is the fawn response, which I really strongly relate to.
I don't think sometimes we don't know, right, until we have an experience where it would be later unpacked and you would acknowledge that it was a trauma response in the body. But you don't also know until you're in the experience. Like, I didn't know that I'm a fighter. Fight is my response until I was broken into when I was living in Darwin and I was living in my apartment and I was living by myself, and I had a group of people broke into my apartment and in the middle of the night, and I heard them, and I had the choice of staying locked in my bedroom or obviously confronting them. And my instinct was to confront them, which I did so. If my avocado nighty.
I'm definitely flight.
Yeah.
I leave.
Really?
Oh, it feels like my entire nervous system is stuck in flight mode.
Oh. We can unpack that in another episode.
We absolutely can.
A lot to unpack.
As someone who hasn't lived in a place for like 5 years, I'm pretty confident
life
that my
choices
solution
and how
is leave.
closely. Yes.
But when we're talking about trauma-informed practices in terms of supporting the young people in our world, there's different types of trauma. So we have different types of trauma ranging from simple trauma, complex trauma, generational, developmental, and what we would call big T trauma. We might just do a really quick unpack of what each of those are. Just to help us understand that a little bit further.
Yeah, so simple trauma, it's actually simple is like, it feels like the wrong label, but it's simple because it refers to a single event. So for example, an example of a simple trauma is like a car accident or a natural disaster. It's a single distressing event that it is one time occurring and it plays a role and something occurs and it's too much. We can't consciously process it in the moment, so we store it in our body, and that is defined as a simple trauma.
A complex trauma, the second one on the list, is a repeated exposure to distressing events. So it's not just that once. Maybe it's something that has happened multiple times, or it's made you feel a certain way, whether it's neglect, violence, all of these things constantly happening.
Yeah, pretty
generational trauma is a bit of a big one. So this is trauma that's obviously been passed down, so through families or through communities. So we're talking about things here. We're talking about things like colonization. We're talking about systemic oppression and how that can show up in our day-to-day lives.
And then finally, developmental trauma. And this refers really specifically to trauma at an early age that impacts us at a developmental level. And I guess when we think about trauma, typically, the word is being thrown around so very much. But typically when we think about the descriptors we hear references to like little t trauma and big T trauma. And I guess those simple and complex traumas are known as what we would call big T trauma, because it's like, if you want more obvious or, explicit, there's that louder explicit link to something specific.
Then say generational trauma.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is just as it is a trauma, but it's less I guess, loud or quote unquote obvious, or however you would describe it.
And it's interesting, right? Because we can sit here and unpack this, and maybe we're listening and going, well, how is this relevant to all the young people that I work with? Maybe not everyone's experienced trauma, that kind of thing. And I guess it's important. I'd love to just read out some of these statistics.
Yes.
Because it really does highlight just how relevant this is to so many people in so many spaces. So the first one is that 50 to 66% of young people will experience a traumatic event by age 16. That's every second classroom in a school, if you think about it, and that whole group.
100%, or half of the young people in our learning spaces. Headspace did some collected some data, and what they found was that 84% of young people attending Headspace centres reported some form of childhood trauma, whether that be, you know, different types, or whether that be quite severe or extreme trauma. 84% of young people attending Headspace have experienced trauma.
It's not funny, the statistics. I don't know why is this your vulnerability card? I'm laughing because of the statistic that 50 to 66%. I just realized what I said when I was like, that's every second class instead of every second person in a class.
Yeah, Amanda and I were both sitting here like.
But Amanda was so kind. She was like, yeah, or every second person.
Well, I try to be quite
No,
kind.
I just really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome.
Do you want to read the third one?
Yes, the final statistic.
Oh, up to 90% of young people involved in the justice system have been exposed to traumatic events.
Yeah, which is huge.
So,
If you are looking to support the young people in your school or your community to develop their public speaking skills, Youth Engagement Project facilitates public speaking workshops for young people. We follow our 4C public speaking framework, where we explore courage, communication, clarity, and connection, the skills and tools aligned with all 4 of those C's that are essential for effective public speaking skills and communication in general. Give us a call or send us a message.
heavy topics, heavy statistics. Why are we sharing these? We are sharing these because sometimes we're going to know about it. Sometimes we are going to receive notification from whomever that might be about a specific young person or a specific situation that's related to a traumatic experience. It is important to note that often we will not know about it, which is why embedding trauma-informed practice in our day-to-day and strategies that support young people and young people's system is so supportive.
And I think too, because it can also just show up as like behavior that would typically be labeled as like
A young person or a
zoning
teenager.
out or being argumentative or whatever it might be, when actually there's often more going on beneath the surface.
Yes. And I feel like, none of us are mental health professionals. That is not the space that we operate in. We are just here talking about practices that support young people. But, I think acknowledging that this approach is supportive for all people is important. And if we're just going to zoom out for a moment, so we've kind of zoomed in on trauma specifically and what it can look like and the types and how it shows up and some of the statistics around it. And now if we zoom out for a moment and we just kind of look at a group of young people and how it subtly or unsubtly might show up, and specifically what happens to the nervous system when the nervous system becomes activated. Now, why is this related? Because experiences of trauma will enhance the system's willingness and want and need and desire to protect itself, which means the system is more likely to activate in response to specific triggers. And I use the word trigger because that is what is outlined in the escalation wave developed by Colvin and Skye, 2 researchers. The escalation wave describes quite literally the wave that our nervous system takes when it becomes activated or triggered. So when it fires, when the amygdala hijack occurs.
Which is important, right? Because if I'm a person supporting a young person and I notice them, maybe the escalation wave is beginning in terms of observable behaviors that we're seeing in a space, actually what I do in that moment can either escalate or de-escalate, right?
100%. And what is trauma-informed practice? Trauma-informed practice is, and if actually, let's just take it back because it's such a pertinent, comment that you make. let's picture the escalation wave for a moment. And actually it kind of is pictured like a mountain. So it's kind of like a line that moves along a bit, at kind of like flatlining, and then it curves up and it peaks and then it slowly comes down, right? That is the journey our nervous system takes. Before it starts to creep up, that is our window of tolerance. And I'm sure many of us have heard of that phrase. The window of tolerance is where our prefrontal cortex is fully activated. We're present. We're able to read and respond.
We can make rational decisions.
100%.
And then there's a trigger.
Yes. And then there is a trigger, which is where the term trigger is being referenced so frequently in our landscape. It comes from this spot, right?
I'm imagining a roller coaster.
Yeah.
You know, at the start when it goes,
Yes.
Yeah.
Something happens and it triggers our system. And that is where, as the safe adults in a system, or in a space, that is where those subtle signs start to show and a system begins to activate. And that's where we can see some of those behaviors. And this is where trauma-informed practice is essential, because if we are not leaning in with trauma-informed practice, we can quite literally be the thing that escalates that young person further.
And I've seen this, and I have been responsible for young people further activating in spaces multiple times, purely because I had a real lack of awareness around my own state and what that does for young people when they are potentially triggered by something that's happening in their environment. And even in the tone of voice that I use, and suddenly I've completely lost this young person because they have escalated. And now we've got to wait, obviously, for that peak to occur and for that young person to come back down, to be in a state to be able to have their prefrontal cortex back online, to have a conversation, to have resolution.
So maybe let's just finish off by running through what are all of the tips and tools and strategies we can be embedding in our practice that support young people in those moments, and that support young people. We can embed them when young people are in the window of tolerance, which reduce chance of trigger and escalation, but we can also embed them and implement them once escalation is occurring as well.
I feel like I've kind of mentioned what it looks like when it can be negative, but one of those tips and strategies is literally being like our own state and being regulated ourselves, letting young people mirror our calm, that whole idea of letting them catch our calm. If we are regulated, then our young people in our space are much more likely to be able to maintain their regulated state.
And I think you also mentioned something else that is constantly underestimated, and that is tone.
Yeah.
We are not paying enough attention to the tone that we're using in these moments. And the tone can literally say, regardless of the words that are being spoken.
And we know this from like a receivership as well, right?
Of course. The tone can say through, either you are safe here or you are not safe here. And we have to be really conscious of the tone that we're choosing.
I think there's also a big part about like predictability over perfection, right?
Yeah.
Like when a young person knows the routine, they know the space, they know what to expect, they're less likely to be triggered, right?
Yeah, and not just from the space, but they know what to expect from you as well as a leader of the space.
Consistency.
And knowing that once that activation occurs, our prefrontal cortex is in the process of shutting down, our amygdala is firing. So that capacity to reason is just not there.
Which is why we can't be sitting down and going, let's talk about your behaviours and actions, and we'll be making a phone call home. And
Well, excuse me, you know better than this. We discussed this yesterday. Literally, all the young person can hear is like, it's like,
it's true.
Seriously.
So we have to use really short phrases, really carefully toned phrases, things like, you're safe, I'm here. And we can just repeat these phrases over and over again.
We also really want to avoid power struggles and ultimatums in these moments. They are not going to get us anywhere, and they're in fact a recipe for further escalation, to be
Really
quite
just goes
frank.
against my personality, that.
Oh.
I'm just kidding.
It's like, because I said so, or I will call this person if, or those kinds of threats and it just, honestly, as tempting as it is, doesn't help. Absolutely
And
doesn't.
We know this
and I
as
think-
humans.
Yes, and I think the reminder though for that, particularly the power struggle piece, because I feel like it's so common in schools, we see and witness it all the time, is that reminder that behaviour isn't personal. It never is. And if we can step out of that and remember that behaviour is not personal, behaviour is just communication, then there's no need to get into a power struggle, because our young person is not trying to have power over us in that moment. They're in survival mode.
And possibly to wrap up, it's not always easy, but it's worth it.
Yeah, it is worth it. And that relationship and connection really are such a tool in supporting de-escalation as well.
Time building relationships, whether that is at the start of a school term or at the start of a week or checking in about a weekend, whatever it might be, time invested in building a relationship with young people is never time wasted.
Yeah. So these are just a range of tools that are all trauma-informed, grounded in trauma-informed practice that we can implement to support young people remaining in the window of tolerance, but also support them if they're in escalation, and how we can support de-escalation rather than maybe,
The roller coaster.
This has been Trauma-Informed Practices with Dr. Amanda Marshall-Bell.
Oh my gosh, don't even
Not a doctor.
No, but I love it. And it's
not
so
true.
important, right? This stuff is just so important to unpack because it's sometimes the most simple and smallest tweaks that we can make to our practice that make all the difference for the young people in our care.
Yeah. I would say tone is the biggest one. Get across your tone, team.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
for coming.
Friends, we will see you next week. This has been Podclass. Ciao for now.
Bye.
I'll be here for you, 'cause you're there for them too.
Thanks so much for tuning into Podclass. If you've enjoyed this episode, we would adore it if you could go on to Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a review. 5 stars would be lovely. We would love to get this podcast into as many ears as possible so we can help and support as many people as possible who help young people. And if you're not already doing so, please go along to Instagram and follow us at podclass.aus.